So listen, we're going to just start off. There'll be, I'm sure there'll be things that you can't talk about because of the book, and you'll need to save things for the book. So just quickly.
Well, I can tell you a new development, which is actually pretty interesting.
Oh wow!
All this talk about China, and especially in America, they're talking about China's the great devil, the great danger for the future, and all this good stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my British publisher in London just emailed me and said that the book has been stopped because it was going to be printed in China.
Oh wow!
Because apparently, even though there are the tariffs and all that stuff, the cheapest place to print with good quality and dependable is still China.
Right.
So anyway, the Chinese censors stopped the printing.
Wow.
For an export book. Jeez. And the reason they stopped was because I mentioned the word Taiwan was a country. And I made a little comment about Mao's bullshit communism or something. Okay. Anyway, they refused to print the book. So we said, well, okay, we can drop Taiwan, from the list of places some of the acts have played. And I can make it, Mao's version of communism.
Yeah.
Well, no. Apparently, once you're red flagged, that's it. You're out. So now the book has been moved to the Czech Republic, and they're going to print the book in the Czech Republic. So I have been officially banned by the Chinese.
Well, Miles, it wouldn't be the first place you've been banned from.
Well, that's a nice list, I guess. The first one was I'll claim China as being the main one. I don't know that I've been banned anyplace else yet. At least not that I know of.
Yeah, I mean one of the great stories that when you and I were discussing, it's all folklore because I don't know if any of them are true or not, was the great story when the police were having trouble getting through the border, and am I right in saying that you maybe made a phone call to your dad?
Well, we've had a couple of situations. I mean, we were in Cairo and we couldn't get the equipment out of the customs, because it came in air freight as opposed to excess baggage. And I remembered a contact that I had when I was a young boy in Egypt. It was the Nasser's bodyguard at the time, who turned out to have been elevated to become the vice prime minister of Egypt. And my little fix-it man who said, "Oh, Mr. Copeland, I'm very sorry, but we can't help you. Your equipment is in freight, and it was Friday, of course, which was the holiday, and of course the show was the next day. So they said, we can help. We can get your equipment out on Monday." And I said, "Well, Monday's too late. The show's tomorrow." So he said, "But if you know somebody in the government, perhaps, maybe I can help, but otherwise, goodbye." I said, well, I do know this guy, Hassan Touhani. Hassan Touhani? You know him? He is a god. He is the vice prime minister of Egypt. So he managed to get him on the phone, and lo and behold, I talked to him, and he said, "Hey, Miles, how are you? How's your father? How's your mother? How's everything? What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, I got this problem at the airport. I got my equipment stuck." He says, "Don't worry, 1 minute." And about 3 seconds later, these sirens are wailing and 30 policemen show up and wave the equipment through. And I turn to the band and I say, "That's management." Anyway, that story's in the book.
Great. Well, don't tell us all the stories in the book. I'm really interested in your story, and that's the story I'm sure that the book reflects. Miles, you and I, you very kindly looked after me for a few years, and you were fantastic, and I learned a few things about you, but some of the things that I didn't learn about you were your background. So can you tell me a wee bit about? I sadly never got to meet Ian, lovely man. And I've never met Stuart either. So can you tell us a wee bit about your family, Miles? A wee bit about the Copelands, and I think your mum was an AD. Is that correct?
Yep, she was a purebred Scot. I'm very proud of it. Her mother was actually a singer in the Edinburgh Opera Company.
Wow.
And she always considered herself a Scot. And I tried to learn the accent, but never quite got it. So I'm, although I did buy Hootsman. It's a bra bericht, moonlicht nicht.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's better than Mel Gibson's.
What?
It's better accent than Mel Gibson's.
Well, okay. Anyway, my father was in the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA. And then this was World War II. And then he was stationed in London, where he obviously met up with the British intelligence. And my mother was in SOE, which was British intelligence. So that's how they met. And I was the first result. And after the war, he was considered an expert in counterintelligence and, learning what the enemy is doing. And so they sent him to Washington to help form the CIA. And he became one of the founding fathers of the CIA. And then when they finished doing that, which was basically to try to create an organization to gather all the intelligence from all the various agencies that had sprung up during the war, hence Central. So it was supposed to be the main source of intelligence that a president or the leaders of the country could, know what the hell was going on in the rest of the world. Anyway, once they had organized it, they said, okay, where do you want to go? And he said, well, my mother actually pushed him to say, well, let's go to the Middle East. So he was stationed in Damascus, Syria, as the chief of station in Syria. And actually, that was really America's first real experience in foreign policy. And he was actually roped into helping overthrow the Syrian government in 1948. And he became sort of a Middle East expert. And later on, when Abdel Nasser was looking to build his own intelligence agency, the CIA sent the whole family to Cairo, and he became the station chief in Cairo. And then he left the CIA, and we went to Beirut, where he formed his own sort of intelligence gathering thing for American companies looking to do business in the Middle East. And that's where Stuart, Ian, and I sort of, I guess, really grew up. And Stuart picked up the drums. And I kind of got interested. Well, I was very interested in music, although I was not musical. I promoted my first rock concert in Beirut.
Brilliant.
And then finished my MA degree at the American University, and then went to London, where I promptly got drafted into the Army. And this was during the Vietnam War. And my brother Ian was already in Vietnam. So I reported for duty in Washington. And lo and behold, out of the 2,000 people who went and were inducted, I was rejected because I have high arches.
Oh, wow.
It was one of those, I wasn't even trying to get out of the Army, just like most of my student friends were. But I was rejected. So I left the induction center thinking that any moment they're going to say, just kidding, come back here. Well, they didn't. Anyway, I got back to London, and I was then approached by this couple of groups that I'd met. And they said, well, we want you to be our manager. And next thing I know, I was in the music business.
So tell me, you've promoted your first concert in the Middle East. And so how old are you when you promote your first concert? And how old is Ian when he goes to Vietnam?
Ian was 18 or 19.
Wow, that's young.
Yeah. And I was 24, probably.
So you're missing a wee bit out. You're missing a wee bit of your schooling, because I know
it was me, and then we have a sister who was the second child.
Yeah.
And then Ian, and then Stuart. And Stuart started drumming. Must admit, he must have started drumming about age 12.
And am I right in saying, did Stuart not go to school in England?
Yes, he at one point, after with the family left Beirut, he went to England with the family. Of course, he was still a student. And he went to Millfield School, which is near in southwest England.
Very close to Glastonbury.
Yeah, yeah. So he had finished his schooling in England, and then he went off to America to college.
Right.
Um, by which time I had gone to England and joined, got involved in the music business. And then when he left college, I roped him into coming and helping me. And when Ian left the army, I did the same with him, and he became an agent.
Yeah.
So we sort of all ended up in the same business. Stuart is a drummer,
And a great drummer.
and me as a manager and a record company boss.
Now, when you tell me this is maybe interesting to some people, because I'm listening to your geographical rounds of the world here. Can you explain how can a young man like you can you go to England on your mum's passport? Can you?
Well,
Yep.
Anybody can go to England. Any American at that time, you go to England, you're only supposed to stay a certain period of time, and you're supposed to get legal and all that sort of thing. But this was back in 1969 or 70. And it was, I sort of arrived in England and stayed, and nobody said anything. It was probably a year or so later when I began to have some success. I finally got an accountant he said, well, I need to make you all legal.
Yeah.
So he's registered me for tax and all that good stuff,
Mm-hmm.
But there's no restriction about an English person coming to America. You get a 3-month visa. If you want to stay longer, then you have to have a job, or you have to go to school, or, there are various legal things you have to do. But I guess back in the 70s, early 70s, there was a lot less restrictions between British and Americans, because I know a lot of British who have gone to work in America, who live in America now.
Yeah, I mean, I did myself. So tell me, when you first hit the English shores, you've obviously done your schooling. You don't get to go to Vietnam, thankfully, and thankfully Ian's okay, and he comes home from Vietnam. But so, how old are you then when you're told you can't
When
join?
I started in the business, I was 25.
Brilliant. And you're based in London.
And I'm living with my parents in London, and I know absolutely nothing about the music business. Nothing. Except I knew what music I liked. That was about it.
And what did you like?
Remember, I had been in Beirut since 1958 with a stint in Birmingham, Alabama.
Jesus.
Where I did my undergraduate work at the place called Birmingham Southern College. But basically, Birmingham is not the center of rock and roll either.
No.
Birmingham, England. Birmingham,
Alabama. Yeah.
And Beirut certainly was not the center of music. So I arrived in England, and when this group approached me and said, "We want you to manage us," my first response was, "Me? What the hell do I know?"
And so what?
You've got the right kind of energy and chutzpah, and you don't know what you're not supposed to know. And you're just going to go do it. And that's basically what I did.
And who was that group?
They were a group called Rupert's People.
Rupert's People, right. And did they go on to be successful or change their name and become...
They really all had day jobs and were not... I guess they thought I was going to finance them or something,
Right.
But then I met the guys that became Wishbone Ash, who became my first real group.
And I loved Wishbone Ash, and that fascinated me when I knew that fact that Wishbone Ash were your first. And were they complete when you started to manage them?
They were basically a drummer and a bass player.
Wow.
And I had met them at a club when they were a 3-piece called Tanglewood.
Brilliant.
And I met them on the night that the group was breaking up. And I said, well, let me see if I can help. And then Martin Turner and Steve Upton came to see me a couple of days later. And I said, well, let's find a new guitar player.
So what?
Let's create a new group.
So what are
we auditioned. And Ted Turner from Birmingham, England came, and Andy Powell from Hemel Hempstead. And we went through, I don't know, probably 20 or 30 guitar players. And we ended up with those two, and we couldn't make up our minds.
Wow.
And then Martin Turner said, well, why don't we take them both? And we'll make Wishbone Ash, we'll have harmony lead guitars. We'll have 2 lead guitar players.
Which was the
So
very
that's what we
thing
did.
that I
We
loved.
figured that was sort of an interesting gimmick, and that's how Wishbone Ash started. It started as a two-lead guitar band.
And that's what I loved about the band. I loved the fact that the dual guitar. I'm not a huge fan of guitar solos, but I love the fact that Wishbone Ash did it as a sort of harmonising guitars. Tell me something. When you're starting to manage Wishbone Ash and Rupert's, what are Mr. and Mrs. Copeland thinking at the time?
Well, my father was not particularly excited about the prospect. He kept saying to me, "Why don't you get a real job? Learn the ropes of how to run a business, and then go out on your own." The idea of sort of embarking on your own, especially when you know nothing, seemed to him a little crazy. My mother would pretty much went with the flow. She didn't really say anything, but my father was, not really that supportive. Although I stayed at the house, and they were not negative in any way, but they were certainly, look, get a real job first.
Yeah.
But when I got the first recording deal and I walked in with a $20,000 check, which was the advance for the first album, $20,000 back in 1971 was actually a real amount of money.
Yeah.
And he looked at that and said, "Well, all right, son, you're on your own, and God bless you. Off you go." And at that point, I never heard again him saying, "Find a real job," because I had one.
Brilliant. And tell me, is your dad and mum and dad in London, is your dad there in a work capacity?
No, my father was always, he had sort of retired, but he was always on TV doing, anytime something happened in the Middle East or something about intelligence, he would be a talking head that the BBC or ITV or some station would call him in to be a talking head, like in any news program you see today. They bring in experts to make comments about something. Well, he was one of those.
And he
was not officially CIA or officially working. Right. Although he did have some clients that he would work with off and on. So he was sort of semi-retired.
Right. So tell me then, Miles, when you're putting together IRS and you're putting together, why does Ian decide to stay in America? Why does he not come back? Or did he come back to the UK?
Well, Ian came to the UK and I gave him a job as an agent.
Yeah.
And he rose to become one of the top agents in England.
Wow.
And then that was from, 1970, it probably took him 3 years to do that,
Yeah.
And then I did this major tour in 1975 called Star Truck in 75. And I had Wishbone on it, the Climax Blues Band, and then I had John McLaughlin's Mahavishnu Orchestra, and Ike and Tina Turner, and various bands. It was a big idea, but it was too big. And I ended up losing all my money, plus the money of some of the bands. And I basically went on the verge of bankruptcy. And at that time, Ian had just flown to America to be tour manager of one of the groups. It was Caravan, it was.
Right.
Another British group from Canterbury.
I remember them.
And he was stranded because I said, "Sorry, Ian, I can't afford airfare, so figure out a way to get back to London." And then I still had Climax Blues Band, and I was looking for a new agent because everybody basically, once you've had a big hiccup or a big falling out in England or anywhere else in the business, a lot of your supposed friends disappear,
Strangely.
What you call fair weather friends, Well, most of everybody I knew wouldn't take my phone call anymore.
Right.
So I had to find a new agent. I went to America and I went to Macon, Georgia, and met a company called the Paragon Agency, a guy named Alex Hodges. And they were down in Macon, Georgia, which was sort of off the beaten track. And they were into country bands, basically, the Allman Brothers and that sort of thing.
Oh, great.
So they kind of looked like they were interested in having somebody who could maybe find us some British artists,
Yeah.
Because that would be a place that British artists would not normally go. So when I'm there, the guy asks me, he says, "Look, do you know any good agents? I'm looking to hire an agent." And I said, "Well, there is my brother. He's fantastic. But I don't want to lose him in England, but I think he'd do very well in America." And he said, "Well, give me his phone number." And so next thing I know, he calls Ian, and Ian takes the job. I encouraged Ian to take the job, and he got the job in Nashville. And then he built, later on, this was the beginning of the punk thing, shortly thereafter. And he ended up forming his own agency, and off we went, But he basically started in England, as I did.
Yeah.
And then ended up in America.
And Ian, I mean, I know that you know this, that the Silencers' second album cover is on the back door of Ian's house in America. I don't know if you did know that. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, if you look, I mean, I know you've saw so many album covers, my God, for so many bands that you've managed, and it's just another album cover. But it always meant a lot to me. It always meant, especially when you and I were first introduced, that picture, that kind of iconic picture that was, what Ian's house was very close to the beach, obviously, right on the beach. And that picture's taken, the four of them standing in the water outside Ian's house. Tell me, so Ian's doing well in America. Where is Stuart at this time? Is Stuart started drumming for anybody at this point?
Well, he was, the basic story was that Stuart was drumming always on his own. And if anything, I would say Stuart was a solo drummer.
Yeah.
His version of drumming was just fill in every hole there is, because there's nobody else there, just him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that he was particularly disciplined in the early days,
Yeah.
So one day I get a phone call from a guy called Daryl Way, who had been the violin player in a group called Curved Air.
Oh, yeah.
And Daryl Way calls me and says, Miles, I want you to manage me. Well, I never knew who Daryl Way was, and I wasn't really interested in managing him. But he said, look, come and see a show. We're playing a show tomorrow. Come and see the show and, tell me what you think. Well, I thought, well, all right. I begrudgingly, I went. So I was kind of perplexed because, he had listened to me, which is, I guess, a good thing, but I really didn't have any intention to manage him. But I said, I felt kind of guilty, he had taken my advice. So I agreed to meet him, and then we said, well, let's form a new band. And of course, Stuart was brought in as drummer.
Yeah.
And that became the first professional group he was a member of. So Stuart joined Curved Air, who I then who managed. Actually, when Daryl called me, we were going to build a new band for Daryl. And then the band got a tax bill.
Oh, dear.
And we decided that the only way to pay the tax bill, it was the Curved Air tax bill, was to assemble the old group. So we got Sonia, Christina, and everybody back together again, and to do it one tour to pay the tax bill. And after that, some of the people left, like the Curved Air drummer left, so Stuart took his place.
Right.
And we rebuilt Daryl's band basically back into being Curved Air, and that was Stuart's new band.
Brilliant. And was John McLaughlin part of Curved Air?
No,
he wasn't. No, I'm getting mixed up. So tell me, what takes? How long lived is that for Stuart? And do you then move Stuart on, or does he move on himself?
It kind of ground to a halt by the end of '76.
Right.
It was doing okay, but it was really not that exciting. And the punk thing was beginning to start. And Stuart began to get the idea that, this rock and roll with all the big entourage and all the equipment. And, you never really made a lot of money because it was spent on stuff that really wasn't that important.
Yeah.
And I had gotten into the punk thing because I had no money. So the only people that were around that had no money as well, who would take my phone call, were the punks.
Wow.
Because nobody else would take their phone call.
So who's the
so
first?
I got him interested in punk, and then he decided this is great because I can form my own punk group and we can make it lean and mean. We don't need a lot of money and a lot of equipment. And then he went and formed the Police.
Now, when he forms the Police, though, he doesn't form them initially with Sting and Andy and Stewart. There's somebody else. Who's the other person?
Yeah, he formed it with Sting, and he brought in a French player called Henry Padovani.
Yeah, and he was from the.
That was the first version of the Police.
So Andy's not around.
It took maybe a year later when Andy joined and could play chords that actually meant that Sting could write better songs, and that really was the change. You know, that the fact that Andy could play these songs, and now Sting could actually write songs that were commercial, was really the change that made the Police happen.
Yeah, and I think one time when you and I were chatting not many years ago, but a few years ago, you had said that there was a wee point that was quite difficult because your brother was wanting to get more involved in the commercial writing side of it, and maybe you felt that Sting was a bit better.
I don't remember that. No, the reality of the Police was Stewart formed a group.
Right.
And he wanted it to be a punk group because that's what was the craze of the day.
Right.
Sting didn't like punk at all. He was coming from a jazz group called The Last Exit from Newcastle.
Oh, yeah.
And when Andy joined, he didn't like punk either. I mean, he'd been in Soft Machine, for Christ's sake, which was, if there was ever a long-haired hippie group, that was it,
Contradiction.
The Police with Andy Summers and Sting were really, they might have looked punk, but they were too old, really, and they were too good a musician to be able to be, and Stewart as well. Stewart was a great drummer by this time.
Yeah.
But the energy was all in the punk thing. So they took the energy of punk and brought in a musicianship that was really lacking in the punk world.
Yeah, I mean, they were my favorite punk band.
What the magic was. But the first recording, the idea was it was going to be a punk record. And it wasn't until I heard Roxanne and realized that this isn't really a punk group like any other punk group. Roxanne was not a punk song. I mean, it was a ballad.
Yeah.
It was very quiet. It was not angry,
Yeah.
And, they didn't even want to play the song to me because they thought that it was something I would hate because I was also looking for something punk. But that really wasn't true. I was really looking for something that worked, something that grabbed me,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the mistake of a lot of people make is they give themselves a set of rules to live by, and they put blinkers on, and they don't necessarily see things that are coming from the left or the right, And the reality is that sometimes you never know where the hit's going to come from,
Yeah.
You may turn your nose up at something and find out that's the thing that might change your life, I mean, I saw a documentary yesterday on TV here in America about Tina Turner.
Yeah.
The song that changed her life, she hated. She had to be talked into recording the song.
What was the song?
It was, there was the first really big hit she had as a solo artist.
Right.
Don't ask me now. My mind is going to go blank. But
yeah, I can't remember myself.
What's love got to do with it?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Who wrote that? I wonder who wrote that.
What's love got to do with it? She hated that song.
Dear. What a song.
Yeah. So it just goes to show that, the Police thought Roxanne was a throwaway.
What an incredible thing. Yeah,
it's one of the messages I write in the book. I mean, when I wrote the memoir. I mean, it is a memoir, but really it's what I hope the book would do would be to be almost an education for somebody to kind of open your eye. It's almost like a marketing book.
Brilliant.
It's like, you never know where the hit's going to come from. So don't be so proud. I mean, like the most important show the Police ever did was the Four People.
Jesus.
It just so happened one of the Four People was a DJ who loved the group and started banging the single on his radio station the next day.
Yeah.
That changed the whole dynamic of the Police in America. So,
Incredible.
Was it Shea Stadium to 80,000 people? No, well, that was an important gig, but we were already big then.
Yeah.
The gig that changed the game was the Four People. The song that changed the game for Tina Turner was a song she hated. the song that changed the game for the Police was a song they didn't want to play me. You know,
So,
Walk Like an Egyptian by the Bangles. You know, CBS told me it's not a single. We won't release it. Until I forced them to release it. It became the #1 single of the year. So you never know what's going to be the thing that's going to change the game, you know.
So are you making the decisions for the boys? Is Sting listening to you, and is Stewart listening to you, or is it a constant struggle?
The good thing about the Police is that they did not dismiss an idea out of hand.
Right.
They would take an idea. They would not go for every crazy idea I came up with, but they figured I'd have some good ideas. So they would be open to every idea. Some they would reject, some they'd say, yeah, why not? And that was more encouraging to me because it means you could come up with ideas and they would not just be dismissed out of hand. I mean, there have been a lot of other acts I've worked with that were, I would say, equally talented, that you'd offer an idea to them and they go, ooh, what are my friends going to think? They would find every reason to imagine why it was a bad idea before they might come around to the reason why it's a good idea. So the net effect of that is that after a while you begin to think, well, I got a great idea for them, but why mention it? Because they're probably just rejected. So to me, the acts that are the most interesting are the ones that are at least open. Jules Holland was that way.
Yeah.
And it's why he became a big TV star.
Yeah.
You know? Because I could say to him, look, I want you to be the host of a TV show. And he'd say, if you think I can do it, all right, let's do it.
Yeah. Jules is amazing. And I know that, do you still look after Jules, Miles?
Is he what?
Do you still look after Jules?
No, I moved to America and lived in America, and you know, and he lived in England, and we kind of shook hands. We're still good friends, you know.
Yeah.
And he wrote a great cover piece for the book, actually.
Oh, brilliant!
And I've always looked upon him as one of the great artists I've ever worked with. But the main thing about Jules, and probably the same I would say about the Police and Sting and whatever, would be that they were open to ideas.
Yeah.
And they would not just dismiss an idea out of hand, because sometimes it's the craziest ideas that work, you know.
Yeah. And
I would say to Jules, let's pretend you're blind and let's fool the audience. And he'd go, yeah, that sounds like fun. Or I would say to the Police, let's play in India. And they'd go, yeah, why not? You know, nobody had ever played there before.
Now I remember.
So that to me was really was one of the great lessons of management. The other great lesson was that probably the best deals I ever made were ones where I asked for no money.
Wow. Because
I learned that if you make the answer to be yes very easy, you're likely to get a yes for an answer. If you make no a very easy answer, you're likely to get no. You know.
Wow.
If you go to somebody and you want to sell them a car and you say, look, I'll give you the car for £1. It's yours. The guy would probably say, really? Sure, I'll take it. You go to him and you say, look, I'm selling you the car. It's £1 million. You get, sorry, I'm not interested.
Wow.
Well, the same works in a record deal or anything else. You know, you go in and you make it a very easy yes, so that all those ideas of, oh, is this going to be a mistake, or is my budget going to be hurt, and suppose it's a failure, will I look stupid, all those sort of things that make somebody want to say no, you eliminate those and you make it, all they've got to do is judge on what they like or what they don't like, and you're likely to get a positive answer. So I made my deal with the Police, with A&M Records, basically saying, look, I don't need your money. Don't give me any money. Record's yours. It's already yours. Now, just listen to the music. I just want a high royalty when it does sell. If it doesn't sell, pay me nothing.
So yeah, you're saying the best way then is you're offering. Is that how you offer deals for the Bangles and for REM and for the Go-Go's and?
No, the point I was making in the book was that getting a big upfront advance is not always the way that is a smart move, you know. And I use two analogies. One was the police. Well, I mean, the reality was, if I could have asked for a big advance and would have gotten it because there was so much interest in the band, you know, I would have asked for money.
Yeah.
But the reality was that there was no tour, there were no fans, I had no press. There was actually maybe the only mention in the press was one little line in a melody maker that said the police, comma, yawn. You know? So I had nothing to recommend the group. So if you've got nothing to recommend it, asking for a lot of money is stupid.
Yeah.
Whereas years later, I did have a lot to offer. I had Stanley Clarke on bass, my brother Stuart on drums, and you know, it was called Animal Logic, and I made a deal with Virgin Records. And excuse me, the advance on the first album was okay, you know, and they put out a first single and a second single, but the advance on the second album was big.
Yeah.
And what actually happened was, after the second single, and the record company was thinking about the third single, which might have been the one that actually would have made the record happen. You know, you never know which is really going to be make it click. But by the third single, the accountants walked in and said, well, if the third single doesn't happen, the amount of money we have to pay for the next album is too great. So you know what? Let's pull the plug from this act and let's drop it.
Wow.
So they never released the third single. So the moral of the story was, because the advance on that second album was so big, they said, we're going to get out. Now, if the advance on the second album had been zero, they would have said, well, what do we got to lose? Let's put out the third single and maybe that happens.
Brilliant.
So maybe it would have failed. I can't say. But the reality was, for sure, that big number scared the accountants and they pulled the plug on the act. And we never got to the second album.
Incredible. I mean, are you using any advice from your dad or your mum, or are you making this up as you go along? Because you're telling me you're not a businessman. How do you know these things? Is it just instinct?
You know, a lot of it you just learn by experience, and a lot of it is common sense.
Yeah.
I've been in a lot of situations. I was asked to advise the Pentagon about how to win hearts and minds in the Middle East.
Wow.
Which just sounds like a pretty crazy idea. But the reality is, all I did was quote things that you could read in any book about, you know, Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people. You know, I was not saying anything that was really particularly unique, you know, but sometimes people just really don't go for the obvious. You know,
yeah.
So for me, you know, I said, you know, my view was, you know, if I really think a song is great, well, must be great, you know, because I'm not a total freak. You know, if I think it's good, all I need to do is find other people like me and they'll think it's good too, you know.
Yeah. And I mean,
I think a lot of business in the music world is a matter of common sense, you know.
Yeah. Well, at what point do you know, Miles? What point do you know, just for people that are coming into the industry, even and it is slightly different times now, but at what point do you know at this stage you put IRS together? So my first question is, what point do you know that you're going to be successful with a band? And let's just say it's your brother's band, the Police. And how then do the Police feel when they start to get successful and Miles Copeland starts to manage other bands? Do they start to feel intimidated, or do they think they're part of a big gang?
I think that the Police recognized that they were part of a movement, and that was sort of what we were all selling at the time.
Yeah.
The punk thing was a movement, and the Police allowed me to put, you know, all my IRS acts and other acts I was managing to be the support acts, because they wanted to have other acts that were in that team, so to speak, as part of the game, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, some acts get very kind of jealous, you know, and they want all your attention, you know. The Police were mature enough to not need that.
Yeah.
And I think that was a good thing, really. And I always felt that I learned something from other acts that I could apply for the police, So I learned from the mistakes I made with Squeeze or with, Wishbone Ash or whoever.
Yeah.
And that worked well for the police. And I think they were old enough to realize that there was an advantage to the good connections that I had.
Yeah, and also, I know just again, but for the times that I spent with you, you're also a gambler as well, Miles. You'll take a punt on something because you know it's good. It doesn't necessarily mean it's.
Yes, and no. I mean, I would say yes. I mean, a gambler, you do it on a basis of feeling that it can work. Obviously, a certain amount of confidence. Yes, you have to have that.
Yeah.
But also, it has to be realistic financially.
Yes.
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a crazy gambler. I mean, I would not sign some group for millions and millions of dollars that was worth nothing. Because that's not the game I'm in. If the price was right and I thought they were good, I was willing to take a chance.
Yeah. Because when
a lot of it could be, how bad could it be?
Yeah.
So I would probably object to being called a pure gambler, where you could roll the dice, and lose everything. Well, I was never into losing everything, So I would never. Like I'm saying, if it's reasonable, it's an easy yes for me to make.
Right.
So when REM came to me and they wanted, the first advance was $25,000, I said, well, how bad could it be?
Wow. Yeah, and nobody would ever think for a minute, like a band like REM, it's because, and that's the great thing about the artist and stuff, because they're so dependent on. Personally, this is just me personally. I think the artist is so dependent on a great manager, and a great manager to make them what they obviously can be. But if they fall into the wrong camp, then they obviously.
I think it takes somebody with, let's say, the drive to make something happen. I mean, if you look at the story of James Brown, he pretty much drove the train.
Yeah.
Watching that documentary on Tina Turner, you realize she was driving the train, but she really did need a big manager to help her.
Right.
And I think that was part of the police. The police it really was a team effort.
Yeah.
I was crucial to the mix, but so were the three guys.
Absolutely.
If you took me out, I don't think they would have succeeded. If you took Sting out, I don't think they would have succeeded. If you took Stewart out, I don't think they would have succeeded.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes it's the combination of things that really make something click,
Yeah.
And, I learned from my songwriting events. I do these songwriting retreats once a year. And I learned from there that sometimes, one writer might seem to be contributing very little, but he might just come up with one line or one little change of a chord or something.
Yeah.
And that might be the element that actually made this thing work.
Absolutely. I was watching.
You can't be too rule conscious or dismiss things out of hand, because sometimes it's the wackiest things that work. A lot of the great inventions were mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, I watched British TV the other day. There was a thing. I don't watch much TV, but I was watching the British TV show the other day, and the lady was talking that she ran this kind of bespoke catering company in the Dordogne, and that she had been to this chateau where this man had put on these songwriting things. And of course I knew it was you instantly, and of course she didn't give your name away, but I was like, go on, say Miles, go on, say it's Miles, just to prove to me, only me, because I wanted to say your name just to say I know him, but are you still doing the songwriting in the chateau in the Dordogne?
Didn't this last year because of COVID. And I'm hoping that this year they will happen again, so we missed 1 year. Well, though things are not looking great for this year as well. So I don't know, maybe we'll miss 2 years, but I did them every year for 8-9 years with ASCAP. And then we did it for about 8-9 years with prior to that. So if it doesn't happen this year, it'll happen next year again, and then we'll go on from there.
Good, and I still want to come one year, Miles.
Absolutely. But I think the lesson is that when I have acts tell me, they imagine that, some manager is going to make things happen for them, or a record company is going to make things happen for them. It really does take the artist to be committed and to find somebody around them that's going to be committed as well. It could be somebody from a record company. It could be a manager.
Yeah.
You never know, but you have to have the energy and ability and belief in yourself to make it happen in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I remember meeting you the first time I met you, and I was speaking about it earlier. The first time I met you in St. John's Wood, and I came down to see you. I was so nervous. I had to ring my mother to tell my mum that this iconic man from the music industry wanted to meet me, and I had to go down and convince myself to you that I was worth spending time with. But I remember you saying to me that day, and sometimes I do get things wrong, but I remember that specific thing where you had said to me, this is what you need to do. First of all, you need to believe in yourself, and or I can't help you. And you said something to me that day. You said, for almost every successful act that you had one other one that you weren't too sure about, whether they were going to ever make it or not, and those things.
Well, I had a lot of, like everybody in the business, you always wave the flag of the acts you succeed with. So I can say, Go-Go's, Bangles, Fine Young Cannibals, the Police, Sting, whatever, Squeeze, Jules Holland, But for all of those acts, there is an equal number, if not more, of acts that just did not quite make it, And when I was writing the book, I actually thought about, well, why did they not happen? And 9 times out of 10, it was because the act themselves shot themselves in the foot. And either if there was blame to be laid on me, it was because I wasn't there enough to warn them. But the reality is that it really takes 2 to tango. I can't do it alone. Either can an act necessarily, but
yeah,
it's a combination of things that makes something happen. But a lot of it is that acts will shoot themselves in the foot. They will break up when it's too early, or they will not have faith in themselves, or I've had so many instances where, a stupid decision was made by the artist and I had to go along with it as the manager,
Yeah. I mean, one of the great things for me was you were always really honest with me, Miles. And I know that during our time together, you were working very, very hard on the Belly Dance Superstar, and you were really honest with me. And you said, look, I have to really, really dedicate as much time to this as I can. And I'm not sure I've got enough time to dedicate it to you. And you can't be any more honest than that, Miles.
Well, focus is an important part of helping something happen, and fortunately, in the case of the Belly Dance Superstars, it was a great idea and it worked in a lot of places, but there were just too many people and there were too many missteps in terms of the money, so we finally ran out of money, and it was a project that really looked like it might mean something, but it didn't really click. It was one of those things that I thought, well, should have happened, but didn't.
Yeah.
There were acts along the way that were the same, that just did not have that something in them. And sometimes it's a killer instinct, to really go out there and deliver,
Absolutely. And I mean, our again, I don't want to reflect on me and you because this is about you. But the time when I decided, or when you decided that I would go on tour in America with Steven Seagal, and I remember you came to Chicago, and sadly, right at the start of that tour, Ian passed away, but you were kind enough to come to the LA and pick me up that day, and I won't forget that. And you also came down to a few of the shows in Chicago. And you said some great things to me that have always kept me going and always kept my belief. I'm still writing, still performing. But one time you came to see me in the House of Blues with Seagal in Chicago, and you said to me, you know, you remind me a little bit of a young Springsteen. I wish I had got you when you were 25. And that's always stuck in my head, you know. I wish you'd got me when I was...
Springsteen was a very interesting artist. And I do recount one story in the book, which was really instrumental. And it was, again, a great lesson in what's important.
Yeah.
Because I was never a fan of his music, really, you know, but I always kind of liked him.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of an engaging, honest, straightforward sort of every man, basically, you know. And we were touring with, you know, we did a tour with Springsteen and Peter Gabriel and Sting and Tracy Chapman and, you know, a bunch of acts. And we went around the world in this Amnesty International tour. And one show we did in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And I became good friends with John Landau, Springsteen's manager, and Springsteen. And Sting and I sat we had our own airplane. So I sat in the front seat of the first class section with Sting, and right behind us was Springsteen and his manager. So we got to be good friends, obviously.
Yeah.
So we arrive in Costa Rica, and we're headed to meet the president of the country, who had just won the Nobel Peace Prize for, you know, some sort of peace he had come to in Central America. You know, I can't really remember the details, other than he was sort of a big honcho of the time. You know, won the Peace Award and all that good stuff. You know.
Yeah.
So we're driving in, and we have all these fans that were lining the road, waving at us coming in. You know, so Springsteen sort of says to the entourage in the bus, you know, this audience, you know, the song that's going to win them over? La Bamba. Well, of course, nobody played La Bamba in their set. Springsteen didn't play it. Either did Sting. Peter Gabriel certainly didn't play it. Tracy Chapman definitely didn't play it. So he kind of threw it out as a challenge, you know, and went in one ear and out the other, you know. So we went to the presidential palace, and of course, the first thing that happened was the daughter and her friends came rushing in, and the whole place turned into bedlam. We had to escape from the presidential palace. But the next day, we do the show, and of course, Tracy Chapman goes on, and no La Bamba. Peter Gabriel goes on, no La Bamba. Sting goes on, no La Bamba. Springsteen goes on. And about halfway through the show, Sting and I are standing by the side of the stage. And he looks over at us as if to say, well, I told you guys, I told you how to win this audience. Now watch this. And then he turned around to the audience and says, la, 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 bamba. And the place went crazy.
Brilliant.
What struck me at that moment was that Springsteen really understood that his job was to go out there and, yes, give the audience himself, but also please the audience.
Yeah.
And he did that. And he owned that show. I don't think anybody in Costa Rica remembers Sting and Tracy Chapman and Peter Gabriel were ever there. It was Springsteen's show. And It was La Bamba that did it. So he just recognized that audience and said, this is how you win them. And he wasn't too proud to do it.
Wow, that's and I think that you know, for and do you then have a conversation with Sting after that to mention it?
Well, I mean, it was a lesson that you couldn't help but learn, you know. And you know, Sting is a musical snob, you know, which I guess is a good thing in some ways, and in other ways is not such a good thing. Springsteen was not a snob. I mean, Springsteen once said to us, you know, he says, well, really, my band's just a bar band.
Yeah.
You know, we just go out and rock and roll. We're just a bar band. He had no pretenses of being anything more than he was. Whereas Sting had real super musicians with him. You know, he really was about musicianship.
Yeah.
You know, And actually, a funny thing was that, at some point, I forget whether it was before this or after, we did a show with Bryan Adams. And Bryan is a really good artist, and he had a big following, but he was very impressed with Sting's band. And he had decided after seeing Sting that he should get himself upgraded and have some better musicians. So he brings in some much better musicians. And then I got a phone call from his manager. Well, Miles, I want you to tell Sting he fucked up my album. Basically, Bryan Adams fans liked Bryan Adams the way he was. They didn't like all these new super musicians.
Yeah. And who was it? Bruce Allen.
So you need to know who you are and don't pretend you're somebody else.
Yeah.
Sting could get away with playing with great musicians because he was a great musician.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Bryan Adams, I guess, couldn't. He was better doing what he was really good at.
Yeah,
and Springsteen recognized that he was really good with the band he had. Why change it?
Yeah. Well, I think that, as you say, in recognizing that is a big part of it. You've always recognized yourself as a band manager, and certainly your record company IRS. How does it feel then to be? How did it feel to sit down and write your memoirs? Was it really easy, Miles? Or...
Writing a memoir means you start you're forced to think about things you hadn't really thought about necessarily.
Yeah.
You've also, a lot of my career started in 1969. Which you're really looking at. I've been in the business 50 years, and sort of some things you forget. So part of it was, trying to speak to people and said, well, what really happened here? I can't quite remember. Why did I do that? Or, so some of it was because I really didn't want to do what I've seen so many other books do, where they either exaggerate or make claims that aren't true, or they basically lie,
Yeah.
Well, sometimes inadvertently, because it's easier and quicker, sometimes you don't want to go through some long explanation to say why something happened. You kind of cut to the chase, but there were a lot of things that were said in other books that I've seen that were really just not true,
Yeah.
So I wanted to be very honest, so I made sure I spoke to as many people as I could remember who were still alive and to get the true story, and in that process, you sort of remember things, and you also remember lessons that you learned along the way, and one of them you were saying a little earlier that at least I was honest. Well, I also say this in the book. Part of me says that if I was less honest, I would have done better.
Wow. Because
there were certain artists that really did not want to hear the truth.
Yeah.
And when they heard the truth, they fired me.
like Steven Seagal.
And the way I look at it and say, well, thankfully, I don't really like lying. So I don't really want to tell an artist what they want to hear. I want to tell them the truth, which is really why Sting wanted me as his manager.
Yeah.
He wanted the truth.
Yeah.
But there were artists that wanted to be lied to.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't one of them, because I remember ringing you and asking you, could you ask Stuart to play drums on one of my songs? And I said to you, it was the only phone call I've ever had that it was a one-word answer in a phone call. And I said, Miles, do you think Stuart would play drums on this song? Or is that a stupid idea? And you said, yep. and then the phone went dead. I thought, well, that's a one-word answer if I've ever heard one. But tell me, I could speak to you forever and ever and ever. It's so great to speak to you again. Tell me, the book. When's the book coming out, Miles?
Well, I in England, it's supposed to be on June 18.
Yeah.
Although we're not sure about some of the other countries, because we just heard about this. The Chinese had censored it.
Right.
So in America, it's probably not going to be until July. But in England, it'll be in June. If it's not 18, it'll be later in June at some point. But it figure June in England. and there will also be an audible version. So because I just finished that last night.
Oh wow!
And where I'm basically reading the book myself.
Brilliant.
Which is a lot more difficult than one might imagine. It's easier to write than it is to speak.
Yeah. Did you never think about getting Stephen Fry to do it? No.
Well, the reality is that sometimes, you can say words in a sentence that are fine when you're reading them, but when you try to say them, you get tongue-tied,
Yeah. Tell me what...
I found myself at a couple of times finding it difficult to actually read the line. So they had to call me back to come in and correct some of the lines, because I had flubbed it,
Tell me, why did you...
But anyway, so that should be out in June as well.
And why did you go for the title, Miles?
Because really, if I look at my career, just think that it's 2 steps forward and everything is forward. That doesn't really take into account the mistakes that you make, because sometimes you learn as many things from your mistakes as you do your successes.
Yeah.
But you still are moving forward. So 1 step forward, 2 steps, 1 step forward, or sorry, there's an expression, 1 step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah.
Means you're basically failing.
Yeah.
In my case, it was 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
Which was really to say, okay, I made successes, but I also had to step back every now and then because I made some failures.
Yeah.
And that was really my life in the music business. So the lessons were as important for the successes as they were for the failures.
Yeah, well, you were never a failure to me, and one of the greatest things you ever done for me was you asked me one day to write a song about a cowboy that falls in love with a belly dancer, and I wrote this song specifically for you called The Cowboy Lament, and you said to me, "That's a great song, JJ," and somehow it managed to find its way to Kenny Rogers' office in Nashville. And I remember you and I were negotiating what we should do with this guy Jim Mazza in Nashville, and you said to me, give him whatever he needs, give him whatever percentage you want. And sadly, last year brought an end to that because the dear Kenny Rogers died, and that song sat in his office for 6 or 7 years, and I played twice. 3 times with Kenny opening up for him live on stage, and I'm grateful for that. And I remember your lovely assistant and a man that's been with you for many years, Steve-O Glendinning, and when you asked me to write that song, and I said to you, of course I will, Miles, and Steve-O let out a little laugh, and you said, don't fucking laugh, Steve-O, this kid could do this. So I appreciated that, Miles.
Well, hopefully, I mean, unfortunately, the Belly Dance Superstars did not become the super act that I had hoped they would, which would have helped that song. But it was you never know.
Exactly, Miles. Exactly. Well, listen, give my love to your lovely wife and your family, and it's been great speaking to you, Miles. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, I hope your podcast does well.
Thank you very much, and I'll keep in touch. And will you well, I mean, I'm not going to beg you, but I might beg you to come down to the chateau one time.
Well, we'll see. Why not? Right now, everything's up in air, so why not?
Absolutely.
Anyway, take care, and we should do this again sometime.
Oh, the sooner we do it, the better, Miles.
All right, take care.
Great to speak to you. Tatty, bye.
Bye-bye.